Hospital porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapangmo TV. Well, it is July the 8th, 2015. Yesterday it was 10 years to the day since the London bombings. This terrible event which devastated the nation's capital and shocked the world. 52 people were killed, over 700 injured. The story of what happened was very, very quickly disseminated by the media. We were told that the disaster was caused by 4 angry young men who carried homemade explosive devices onto 3 London Underground trains and 1 bus and detonated them. The dedicated research since then by many, many different people has revealed that that official story is a lie. And one of the most dedicated, the most expert, and the man who's written the only definitive book on the subject is my good friend and fellow researcher Nick Kollerstrom. And this evening, ladies and gentlemen, Nick Kollerstrom is going to be doing a live lecture here in Oxford. He's going to be speaking at the Albion Beatnik Bookshop, which is a lovely bohemian venue in North Oxford. And so we're going to go there and we're going to film it. So if you'd care to accompany me, we shall head to the venue.
Who came here, I don't know, about a month ago to talk on his current book, which is on the Holocaust. But this is a book that he wrote how many years ago?
2009 it came out.
2009. So for those who like the intrigue and conspiracy theory and what actually happened and all of that, this is one of the sort of classic texts. You've sold actually several thousand copies.
Well over 1,000. Yeah.
Which is actually quite remarkable. And thank you very much, Nick, for coming along. And over to you.
Well, the weird thing is that seems to be the only book on the subject. I've got no idea why, but there are many sort of truth books about 9/11 you can get, but oddly enough, my book seems to be the only one that brings together the story about the London bombing. It's got all the details, pretty well everything you might want to know about it. I'm not asking you to agree with the point of view I'm going to put forward. You're most welcome to disagree. But I do come from what calls itself the truth movement, and that is the British 9/11 truth movement, which seeks to go behind the appearances of what we're told by politicians to what is really happening. And within that truth movement there is the idea that there is an agenda to create spectacular events that instill terror, that are very terrifying, but they're not what they appear to be. That the people blamed are not the actual real perpetrators of the event, and the truth movements have grown up all around the world in the aftermath of 9/11, a great event at the beginning of our millennium, which changed the world really. It gave a new narrative, and the narrative was of terrorism, okay? And the narrative was of Al-Qaeda as the terror threat. And but that narrative is not necessarily true. It was used especially by President Bush and Prime Minister Blair of this country. They were closely concordant on this, and it was been used to justify the most terrible wars: the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, the idea that there is an enemy called Al-Qaeda that can be fought, and is somehow to do with that enemy somehow caused terror in various countries. Now let's just, if I may refresh your memory, we had the great event of 9/11, the cataclysmic collapse of the World Trade Center towers, planes flying into them, and Muslims get blamed. Then the next year, 2002, something happened in Bali. A bomb went off in Bali, and a Muslim got blamed, and that had an effect on the whole of Australia, Southeast Asia, of getting them to agree to come into the Iraq war, which they otherwise might not have wanted to do. So these events give a very vivid sense of an enemy, a wicked enemy. Okay. Then the next year, 2003, there was an event in Istanbul. Actually, a little known, British embassy got blown up. Got blown up when hardly anyone was in it, and some Muslims got arrested and blamed. Then the next year, 2004, in Madrid, there was a frightful explosion on railway trains in the morning. And this happened immediately after a big 4 or 5 day NATO anti-terror drill rehearsal, which they had in various different countries. They do it every year. They have a big NATO drill exercise when they all meet together. And they had just finished, and within 24 hours, trains blow up in Madrid. And Muslims get blamed. Right away, the blame falls on people who are called Al-Qaeda. Now, it often happens that the people blamed proclaim that they have nothing to do with it, and that happened in Spain. The Muslims arrested said, look, we're nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, can we please take the politics out of this trial? We're being strung up and blamed for this, and we may protest a bit, but we're not responsible for anything, or not capable of doing anything like that terrible, frightful explosions that happened in Madrid. Then a year later, we get London bomb, 2005, and the blame falls on 4 British Muslims who live up north of England. The idea that they were somehow dissatisfied and angry or whatever, and had some amazing skill in blowing up 3 different underground trains and a bus. So I want to focus on that today. And then the next year, it happened in Mumbai in India. There was again a big terror threat. So whatever is doing this can apparently move right around our world and create these events. And all the media now have accepted the idea of Islamic terror, the idea that Muslims somehow get so angry or whatever, or as Bush said, they hate our freedoms, for whatever reason, they want to do these terrible, frightful things. I want us today to look more closely at one in particular of these. In general, I feel that Muslims are being framed, and they thought that Muslims are the ideal enemy because they're fairly quiet. My experience, they just want to get on quietly, fairly law-abiding, and they don't express their opinions very much, and so other people can, as it were, write their script for them. They get it is terrible for them to get blamed after 9/11. It was sort of very distressing. Muslims around the world that they felt the heat of it. 19 young men, Muslims, get accused of having taken over and hijacked aeroplanes. Okay, now the 7/7 event, I'll just recap it a bit to remind you what happened 10 years ago. First of all, was it a bit similar to 9/11? It was a 4-fold event. There were 4 different things that happened in London, get blown up, and it was about 9 in the morning, which is a bit similar to the times when things started happening in America, with 4 planes being apparently hijacked and going into buildings or being crashed. What about the lines on the underground, Piccadilly line, Edgware Road, Aldgate, Russell Square, and then a bus at 30 in Tavistock Square? Something terrible happened to each of these. Now, we had an inquest, which there's never been any public inquiry. I want you to just consider how strange that is. The biggest attack on London since the Blitz, 52 people dead, hundreds injured. There's no public inquiry. there wasn't what they call an inquest. Now, what is an inquest? An inquest you have when somebody's dead, and you have a post-mortem. An inquest is when you talk about the dead body, basically. Okay, that inquest, which lasted from 2010 to 2011, 5 or 6 months, wasn't it? It went on quite a while. We discovered that there had been no post-mortems on the bodies. No post-mortems. Doctors had not analysed to find the cause of death of those 52 bodies. So that was quite astounding. How could it be that there were no post-mortems to ascertain the cause of death? Was it that we were being given a narrative? It's very much as if the press were being given a narrative which nobody was allowed to question. There was no debate in the media about who had done this or how it had been done. There was a certain amount of debate. Were these lads from abroad, Al-Qaeda, were they influenced by some sort of terror narrative from abroad, or was it home-brewed terror? There was a certain amount of disagreement on that, but otherwise there was concordance on the whole theme of Al-Qaeda terrorists. And you'd get what called itself the truth movement would then disagree, and its disagreement will be expressed on the websites. For example, that the 4 lads had no interest whatever in politics, they were perfectly happy and well adjusted, that they were not grievous against this country, they knew nothing whatever about chemistry, they had no bomb making skills whatsoever, and they agreed to come to London to help for some sort of, they may not quite know what it was, some sort of drill or whatever. That is the alternative narrative that you will find on websites, okay? So we get a terrific polarity between what is printed in newspapers and what appears on websites. And so busy people who have got families, got jobs, read papers, will get a story. And that story involves terrorism, and the terrorists are out there and they want to destroy our way of life. And then people who are maybe unemployed, who've got loads more spare time, will surf the web and they'll get a different narrative about these lads being maybe framed or not having any motive that anybody can discern, motive or the ability to make a bomb. As I'll come on to, a very detailed analysis that happened at the inquest of each coach and all the different people sitting where they were sitting, all the different testimonies, all the different people on the bus where they were sitting, carefully counting the number of dead bodies, relating that to the names of all the dead people. It does not leave any possibility of those 4 Muslims having been on those coaches. Okay? That you will not read in any newspaper. You will not get any disagreement in any newspaper. That's what I found so bewildering. I used to think in my youth that there was some sort of left-wing radical alternative analysis, you know. What about the communists, the Morning Star? Aren't they supposed to disagree with the government? What about the socialist left-wing, the Socialist Weekly? No, there's no disagreement on the narrative. What we call state-fabricated terror, which I would say is the main art form of the 21st century, is not something that any left-wing media outlet will go for. So what is happening here? What is happening? How come the far left, the communists and so on, which is supposed to be quite bolshy, how come they're agreeing with the state about the narrative? Why aren't they questioning it at all? So I suggest this is quite a strange thing happening in our time. Even when you get something, however much I would say the 9/11 narrative is incoherent in what is claimed, I would say it's for those planes to go into the Pentagon and go right through, have access right to the highest security codes, that must show inside involvement. And you can't just hijack a plane nowadays and take it over and change its flight path and make it fly into a building. You actually can't do that. A long, detailed conversational discussion with real air pilots ascertained that you can't actually do that. And at that speed, you couldn't actually get it to hit those twin towers. And a whole lot of things are impossible with the official narrative. And yet, Why don't we ever get any journalists being allowed to talk about this? You've got 30 or 40% of, say, Americans don't believe the official story, and I would guess it's something a bit similar to that in this country, the official 9/11 story. Well, if that's so, why can't any journalist talk about this? There's great classic conspiracy videos. I'd recommend Loose Change, for example. Loose Change, everyone should watch Loose Change about what happened on 9/11. Well, and there's a whole load of excellent books truth books about 9/11 that I could recommend. The New Pearl Harbor, David Ray Griffin, for example, classic by a university professor. Why can't any British journalist? Why isn't there a single MP in Europe or in Britain who will speak words of truth about it? We used to have Michael Meacham, in a cautious kind of way, he would say, well, we do need a public inquiry into this, and should we really accept the mainstream narrative here? But I think that was a few years ago. I think he keeps his head down now. I don't think we've got any MP really who speaks words of truth about this. This is the most important event of this new millennium, okay? And still less is there anyone who will speak words of truth about, in my opinion, humbly suggesting, about what happened on the London bombing. Those who came in late, I'm not expecting you or asking you to accept my opinion. Just I've got what you might call a conspiracy theory view, which is that it was very much an inside job and it wasn't done by the defined official enemy. So, but I'm not wanting to impose this on anyone else. Just I'm just sharing my view. Okay, and I happily take any interruption or discussion you want on this. Okay, well, this 10th anniversary, it's been evident we just get terrific emotions conjured up in the press. Oh, here are the poor families, you know, and heart-wrenching emotions. That's what happens every anniversary, and you're not allowed to look at deconstruction of the official narrative. Okay. I'm trying. Let's focus a bit more on what really happened and where to begin. Well, one place to begin, I think, is the inquest, which looked at, gave detailed maps of where people were sitting. These coaches really did blow up, and there really were a lot of shocked people. There really were a lot of corpses. There were a lot of people, for example, with their feet blown off. Legs and feet blown to bits in the coaches, in the underground. And there were a whole lot of stories about holes in the floor with the steel bent upwards. Narrow steel bent upwards. The Edgware Road, this came out vividly in the inquest, and my website very much involved in deconstructing this. You've got no less than 3 different holes in the main coach of Edgware Road that blew up. Okay? And you've got heart-rending stories. In the dark, all the lights go out. In the dark, wounded people are climbing around, getting entrapped in these holes. And one of them has somebody dying in the holes, whose legs get blown off. So it's a hellish nightmare image in the dark. But there are these 3 holes with the metal bent upwards. And the Edgware Road coach quite clearly has an initial narrative, a journalist Guardian called Hogenbaum, of it being lifted up off the rails. It was lifted up by the blast, and that is part of the initial story, which we have. The Guardian's journalist was there all morning, hearing people coming out of Edgware Road, and he reported it, and he sent it as an audio report to the Guardian. And the Guardian couldn't publish it because soon after it received that, the official narrative starts coming in. The official narrative is that there's a terrorist in the coach that did it, and that isn't compatible with it being lifted up off the rails. Okay, so that remains as a kind of audio. What they publish the next day is more diluted, and so it doesn't quite have that message. But because various people have copied that audio, they cannot destroy it, and it's still there. So you get this enormously interesting initial report from people streaming out from the Edgware Road station that this is lifted up, and then it becomes much. And you also get the stories of mainly people with feet blown off and so on. You don't get arms blown off. You don't get people get head blown off. It's something to do with what is around the floor, and that is amazingly ignored by the various hearings that there have been. There have been various attempts to fob off the British people of not having an inquiry, and what they do is hear evidence. You get people coming giving testimonies. Well, yes. Well, is anyone who can evaluate these testimonies? No. We're here at a 6-month inquest. Terrific lot of witnesses and stuff. Yes. Well, is there any intelligent panel or tribunal that's going to evaluate these witnesses? No, that isn't actually on the agenda. No. It's just to make you think you've had an inquiry when actually you haven't. And on the edge of the road, they tried to put one of those guys called Mohammed Siddiq Khan. He's supposed to be sitting there, and they cannot get credible witnesses to see him. That's the problem. There was one fellow who was unconscious for a long time in hospital, had both his legs blown off, and he was strongly conditioned to be persuaded that he saw Khan. So that's the one question everybody kept asking: does he Khan? Does he Khan? And he sort of gave testimonies. So there's enormous media interest and reward if somebody will claim that they remember seeing the terrorist. But his account of Khan, it isn't coherent. It changes about. Well, it depends on where. One point he says he thinks Khan is right next to him, and he sees him pull the plug on his rucksack to make the bomb go off. In another account, he's sitting over there, but he's not next to any of the 3 holes that really exist in the floor. Okay, so I'm suggesting that a good place to start with the story is the analysis. For example, at Aldgate, you get 6 people dead, and you get the inquest, somebody testifying on oath, a professional, what's it called? Not undertaker, but somebody concerned with looking after, taking care of his dead bodies. He swears on oath that he can count the 6, and those are then named. And there is not room for a 7th. If you wanted the extra terrorist to be there, he'd have to be a 7th person. It's supposed to be Lindsay Germain, so they try to make out that Lindsay Germain blew himself to bits so completely into a whole lot of different bits that he couldn't be counted as a body. Now, do you really want to believe that? And then, not only did he blow himself to bits so much that he can't be counted, but, of course, he has his identity, his ID, driving licence stuff, and he puts that on the floor to make sure there's evidence for him being there. Okay? So, you get farcical stories of identity being found on... I mean, if you were going to blow up a train, would you take your passport and ID with you and put it out there to be found out afterwards?
Maybe if you're going to blow up or shoot up a journalist's office, a cartoon, a comic office. Do you remember?
What?
Charlie Hebdo.
Oh, right.
The guy, he left his ID on the car seat.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. As my colleague has pointed out, the different state-fabricated terror narratives do link up. There are a whole lot of similarities. Anyway, let's stay with the 7/7 event. Likewise, let's move on to the bus that blew up. The lid of the bus very neatly lifted off, and there was quite a straight line. I really need some videos here. There was quite a clear straight line where the whole top of the bus must have been cut around beforehand so that it could lift off quite easily. When the top of the bus lifted off, you saw a photo of a whole lot, which you may remember, a whole lot of people standing up on the top deck. And there was a little bit of blood spatter, I think, coming out of the nose because of the pressure, but there was no real damage. People didn't lose their hearing or anything. And I would say there were 2 or 3 dead bodies around that bus from examining all the photographs after whatever happened to it. They tried really hard to get anyone to remember Hasib Hussein, who is supposed to have been sitting there. You know, and so they'd be interviewing somebody who is supposedly on the seat next to Hasib Hussein, saying, you know, do you remember him? And they say, oh, sorry, I'm afraid not, you know. And then there was enormous publicity. One lady, Lisa French, you mentioned Lisa French, she thought she remembered some Muslim guy with a rucksack, but what she actually recalled was he had a computer laptop bag on his shoulder.
which wasn't at all similar to the quite large rucksack that Hasib Hussain was supposed to have had. And then there was a guy downstairs, Richard Evans, who claimed, oh yes, a lot of publicity. Yes, he saw Hasib Hussain right next to him, fiddling about with his rucksack, and this fella got off the bus just before it blew up, and so that was his testimony. But then Hasib Hussain had to be moved upstairs. The final story was that he was sitting upstairs. So, how was that initial testimony of him downstairs supposed to work out? Well, it didn't really fit at all, and the account of his clothing that he was wearing didn't fit at all. Okay, I suggest that Hasib Hussain did really come up to London that day. Two of them in Leeds. They hired this car, little Nissan Micra. Him and Tanweer did drive down from Leeds in the early hours of the morning, and we have a testimony from somebody on the garage of the forecourt of the M1 filling station, remembering them come and buying some sweets and stuff and petrol. So they came up to they came up to Luton. So several of them drove to Luton, and this is an important part of the story. I'll just remind you of that. They then get a train from Luton to King's Cross. Okay, a Thameslink train, and they're supposed to get the 7:40 train, and the whole government narrative has them getting this 7:40 train, which then goes down to King's Cross by about 8:20, and they claim that CCTV pictures show them. Right now, when they're in Luton, they meet up with Jermaine Lindsay, who comes from Aylesbury, and then they go down together on this train. Now, I and a colleague went to Luton Station a few weeks after this whole story. We'd heard somebody saying that train times were impossible. So we went there and we talked to all the people, commuters on the platform, and we're very fortunate. We got the official data from the station, also official data from King's Cross about when the trains had actually left, when they'd arrived, when they left. So we got the real data from the computer database, and we were very fortunate to get that. And that altered the whole narrative, because it turned out that the 7:40 train had been cancelled that morning, and all the other trains were greatly delayed due to overheads, wire problems, or leaves and windy thing with leaves blown up, and so some electrical problems. All the trains that morning had been slowed down by at least 20 minutes. Now, it took the government about a year before they finally acknowledged this. Reid, Home Secretary, acknowledged in Parliament there was no 7:40 train, so they must have got another train. But basically, with the photo of those 3 or 4 of them, which looks very much like a photoshopped image, but let's not go into that because I can't show the pictures here, at the Luton station, they are sauntering in, and it is almost impossible that there will be any train that they could have caught that would have got them to London in time. That was the crux of the matter. Now, there was a brilliant video somebody did called The Ripple Effect, which put the whole story together, and it had those lads coming up to London with a delay in the train times. That was the flaw in the perfect crime that had been planned. The delay in the train times meant that they arrived as the bombs were going off. So there's a bomb going off at King's Cross. There are terrific crowds coming out, panicking crowds coming out from the underground in King's Cross. As well as that, there's more to it than that. There's also a drill going on, a terror drill. And police have been arriving at King's Cross for some sort of drill that morning. Okay, so we've got the lads arriving late. And what is that drill? Well, let's quote Peter Power at this point. He's the terror czar of Britain, the expert on the great terror rehearsals that go on. And it's the new philosophy of the 21st century that businesses have to have resilience. Resilience means that you plan in case terror strikes your business, and you can somehow know how to handle it. Okay. Now, to be able to cope with terror striking, you have to, as it were, act it out. This is where the great ambiguity comes in. You have to have actors who are acting as if a terror drill, some terror attack is going on, and you say it's only a drill. Okay. Now, this is called that sort of famous crucial part of conspiracy theory in the 21st century. And let's just go back to 9/11. There are planes flying across the screen that shouldn't be there. And is this a hijacking? Is this an attempt? No, it's only a drill. So how realistic does your drill become? Are those monitoring the planes on 9/11 seeing planes that shouldn't be there? Is that just a drill, or is it the real thing? Okay. So there's that terrific ambiguity. Right. Well, that is, as it were, the holy grail of conspiracy research, how your terror drill morphs into the real thing. Now, Peter Power confessed at 5 o'clock on July the 7th, 2005, he said, we were having a drill at those same stations. He named the 3 stations. The same 3 stations at the same time, 9 o'clock in the morning. Aldgate, Edgware Road, Russell Square. Well, people started computing the probability. What's the probability that this happens? That you get 3 terror drills on the same day, on the same time, as the date when terror strikes in London. And a lot of people thought that was improbable, at the level of 1 in a billion or something. But it's more than that. There was a panorama programme the year before, 2005, May 2005. Okay. Now, there's a panorama programme about terror striking London. And this has 3 underground stations being attacked with bombs going off, and 1 other accident or disaster on the road in London, of a vehicle in London on the road. So it's a 4-fold event, one on the road and 3 with tubes being blown up. That's a panorama programme in May 2004. And guess who's the main speaker telling you the narrative? Peter Power. So Peter Power is taking you through this narrative, which is a docudrama, and it is, quote, set in the future, but only just. It's done in the sense of rolling news narratives. People are reading the news in this docudrama. They're reading the news as if it's real news, and you're supposed to apprehend, no, this isn't real, this is just a simulated real programme. Right? And we get somebody emulating the Home Secretary, who was Jack Straw, saying, this bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda. So, on that panorama programme, 2004, you have tragedy strikes London, 4-fold tragedy, 9 o'clock in the morning, and you then are immediately told who's done it. The narrative immediately says, this is Al-Qaeda, this is their modus, this is how they do things, and this bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda. Now, that's virtually identical with what Jack Straw did actually say a year later on the day of 7/7. It bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda. So, what is real and what is the fiction? I answer that the fictional narrative is the process of imagining what really happens. The imagination for these fabricated terror events is not in some Muslim. There is no Muslim centre that imagines these things happening. The process of doing the terror drill rehearsals is itself the imagination of what happens. During Peter Power's terror drill, most people doing that drill would have thought it was just that. We're doing a drill. Peter Power himself probably thought that. Peter Power lives in a world in which he doesn't quite know what is going to be real or go live, or when he's doing his drill, because there are previous events when he's been doing drills or something when just a real type things happen. But let's not go into that. So he, at 5 o'clock in the morning, afternoon, he said, I've still got the hairs on my head, back of my head standing up with a shock, and so he decided to come out and tell people. He then made several statements on television, starting at 5 o'clock on that same day, that he was working for some sort of business which he wouldn't name, which was doing this rehearsal. Now I suggest that is part of the story that was not meant to happen. There were various bits of this perfect crime which didn't quite go according to schedule. I suggest Peter Power was definitely not intended to say that he was running a drill. The point of a drill, which synchronises with the actual event, is that most people think that it's just a drill. They're just honest civil servant citizens doing this. And it only takes a very small number of people in strategic positions to make it go live, to press the actual buttons for whatever's going to happen. And they have a cover, whatever they're doing, wherever they are, that the drill is going on. For the 9/11 event, for example, there are all sorts of drills going on, which I won't even attempt to outline, simulating various aspects of what happened on that day. And so it's quite difficult to tell when the drill, as it were, went live. Okay, so we have Peter Power doing this drill, and he's slightly ambiguous in his various accounts of it. Is it just people in an office looking at computer screens? Or is he somewhere in a station with a megaphone warning people and helping people to how to cope? For example, King's Cross Station. So we have that ambiguity. In about 4 different statements Peter Power makes about this, leaving it a bit unclear quite how real his terror drill was. Okay, but I put it to you from the inquest. Various people made comments. For example, Jermaine Lindsay, he arrived something like 8:45, 9:10 at King's Cross. And he asks if he can see the line manager at the station. He asks somebody up at the barrier, ticket barrier. He's just come all the way up from Luton, Leeds, Luton to King's Cross. He asks if he can see the line manager. And the person who he asks later swears that is definitely Jermaine Lindsay. Because he says he's got something important to say. He can't tell the guard here, but he wants to tell the line manager. Now I suggest that is Lindsay wanting to share his knowledge of what he'd been told about the drill he was participating in. He sensed something was wrong. Anyway, that never happened. They bolted, and there's every reason to suspect that at least three of the lads bolted. They got back onto the train they just got off from, and it took them to Canary Wharf. Canary Wharf is East London, and there's a lot of stories, newspaper stories, of those 4 lads, of some of those lads being shot there, of terrorists being shot. So that happens about 11 o'clock in the morning. It's blanked out from the British press, blanked out from British media, but it is in some early news reports, and other newspapers around the world do carry the story. And people have trawled all the newspapers to search for evidence of this, and I got a lot of testimony on my website when I ran the story of people at Canary Wharf remembering and describing what happened. So there definitely was a big security operation at Canary Wharf and people being shot just that time, and there's a widespread consensus that by 11 o'clock those lads had been bumped off. They're all dead. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of other things we could say about the drama of this story. For example, at Luton, okay, those lads they come down from Leeds, and when they park, Jermaine Lindsay comes to join them. No, Jermaine Lindsay has been there. He gets there an hour early, and he has a nap. He's fast asleep. And somebody lady walking around the parking about 6 in the morning, sees him fast asleep in his van. Now that doesn't really sound like a suicide bomber, does it? If you thought you got your last hours of your life, you wouldn't really nod off for a nap, would you? Anyway, she sees Jermaine Lindsay fast asleep when she's putting, I think she put some parking thing on his van. Okay, then the others arrive, and he's woken up, and he comes round to join them in the dark. Dawn hasn't yet dawned, and you see this Jaguar. The lights go on the Jaguar, and it comes round and parks right next to those lads. And people wonder, is that Peter Power? Because he had a Jaguar. So that's some sort of expression of British security, British police, whoever had talked those three into doing this, this bit of excitement, you know, earn a bit of money, help with a drill, that Jaguar coming to join them would have been a crucial part of the story. And just as it comes down to join them, this you know, CCTV cameras, you're looking at this, the CCTV then blacks out just as the Jaguar drives up. So as it always does at crucial moments. I expect most of you are familiar with that story, that when key events are happening that we're not supposed to know about, the CCTV blacks out and is not available. Okay, so we lose the CCTV when that car drives up next to that important meet-up situation in the car park at Luton. And I could add there was a drill rehearsal about 10 days earlier in June, when three of the lads likewise came to Luton station. I think it was a little bit later, and we have the same Jaguar then is seen in the car park. So I think looks like quite a good part of the story that helped them. And maybe, for example, whoever was in Jaguar gave them the rucksacks, the big suspicion-looking rucksacks. That's part of the story. They might have been given them then, possibly. Okay. Having mentioned CCTV, let's be crystal clear that London is the most heavily CCTV place in the whole world. Okay, if you walk around London, live in London, you get filmed CCTV about 200 times. Is it a day or a week? It's all the time you're being filmed, and just about everywhere. Okay, and yet there's not a single CCTV that anyone could produce of those four lads on the trains or the bus they were supposed to be on. I mean, that 30 bus. First of all, oh, we're sorry, none of the CCTV is working on that bus. Well, how come it's working on all the other buses in London? Then the 30 bus is derouted. It goes through Tavistock Square, which it doesn't normally do. And you're told, oh, well, that's because of the disturbance in King's Cross. Well, all the time it seems rather strange. Then, when it goes into Tavistock Square, get this, it stops just around the British Medical Association, but there's no bus stop, and the bus driver gets out to ask the way. Now, where did you hear a British bus driver getting out to ask the way, you know? Okay, it's just a Greek fella, gets out to ask the way, and he turns round, oh, my bus has just blown up, fancy that. So he sees his bus blowing up, and he's conveniently out of the bus, and he claims that he stays around a bit to try and rescue people, moving account when he goes over to Greece. He's Greek, but he's holding somebody in their arm trying to rescue them. But what he actually does is walk away. He's taken away, and he then ends up somewhere in West London, quite a long way away, as if the police have managed him. And he's not the usual driver on that route. He's been changed over. So everything about that 30 bus looks very much managed. The route is managed, CCTV has been tampered with. There's then a story which is anonymous, but appeared on, I think it's the Alex Jones Prison Planet, of somebody who said they worked at the bus depot for that 30 bus and the weekend before, and there were some people come fiddling around with that bus. They saw them fiddling around with it at the bus depot, and that is very likely something being tampered with the CCTV. Or if you think there was anything else strange about the way the bus blew up, for example, getting the top repaired so it would just lift up, that might have been done by those people that weekend. So everything about that bus was rather strange and abnormal, and looked like it had been rather prepared, you know. I could add, depends how conspiratorial you want to get, and now I just want to give you options, some of the ways conspiracy theorists look at this. The number 52 came out very early on. Oh, Terminal Encounter is 52, and they were still digging people up. People who hadn't yet died, they were in hospital, who were going to be in that final number of 32. They were still in hospital, hadn't yet died. So it looked rather a prefix number, and 52 number of cards in pack of cards, you get 4 lots of 13 in a pack of cards, okay? So Tavistock Square had 13, Piccadilly line had twice 13, 26, and the other 13 was the other 2 tube trains. And I especially noticed at Tavistock Square there was clearly only 2 or 3 deaths, bodies, because there were very detailed photographs of all around that bus when it had blown up. They're a very extraordinary sight, okay? And there were 2 or 3 people looking at the testimonies and the photos. My chapter, I got 2 or 3 people dead. And the bodies were all removed at lunchtime, midday, bodies removed. Then the Evening Standard comes out just after lunch, and that has, I think it has 9 people dead. And then the next day, the canonical number of 13 has been reached. Okay? And I did an interview. There's one person there called Miriam Hyman who was quite interesting because she was at King's Cross. She got off the tube and because of the disruption there at King's Cross, and she rang up her father. And she had an appointment somewhere around Canary Wharf in East London. She rang up her father round about 9:45, just a minute or 2 before 10:15. And that's when the bus blew up in Tavistock Square at 10:15. So she can't really be on the bus if she's ringing up her father at 10:15. So I phoned up her father. My colleague Muadzib, who made that ripple effect video, gave me the phone number, and he said, "Look, why don't you ring it?" I said, "Well, I think I should." He said, "Yeah, go on, ring him up." And I got fearfully condemned by that. People said, "Oh, how awful! Can you believe it? You know, he's actually disturbing the poor father." Well, I just asked him, "Would you prepare to answer the question?" He said, "Yes, he would." And I politely asked him, "Would you confirm that you did that phone call with your daughter?" And he did confirm it. So, in other words, it's quite impossible that his daughter could have been on that bus. Well, I won't go into the detail, but there was a whole lot of the distraught relatives had to wait a long time before they were told what the people had died of. They often had to wait a week before they're allowed to see any body of their deceased body. So I think there was some sort of funny business going on. All the bodies were taken to a military centre to be looked after, guarded at a military centre at Old Street. And let me just throw in that military centre got the job on the 6th of July, part of the government's anti-terror drill. They got the job the day before it happened. I'll give you more details in my book there if you want, but that is part of the pre-arranged nature of this event. The place where in Old Street, where all the bodies were going to be put in 4 different piles, as it were, was kind of pre-prepared. And then Tony Blair gave them an award for how well they'd coped with the whole tragedy. So I've tried to show how there are a lot of very suspicious bits to this story. Okay, well, I'll take any questions, by the way. Let me just suggest a geopolitical motive for this. Just supposing we go with the view I'm suggesting, that those Muslims were innocent patsies roped into what they thought was a drill in London, and it was, going up to London was quite exciting for them. These were lads, the things they talked about in life was cricket, buying the new trainers or whatever, who the girlfriends were, whether getting into the local college, that sort of thing, and they'd enjoy smoking a bit of dope on the grass together. And that was their life. Okay? Only one of the 4 was religious, Tanweer, and he would offer, for example, to pray for his friends if they were unwell or ill. None of these characters had any great malevolence. One of them, Muhammad Siddiq Khan, was a great local hero and really admired by the community. And he was at a school, a mentor. He was a mentor for a local primary school, and he would interview kids, and the headmistress spoke up for him after the event, saying what a great job he'd done, and him and the headmistress got into the Times Educational Supplement, okay, as an example of an up-and-coming school in that area, helping regeneration of the neighbourhood. Tony Blair's son came, Tony Benn's son came from the House of Commons to Beeston for a healthy living centre to open it, and Muhammad Siddiq Khan was in touch with them, and his wife, a very distinguished Indian, Hasina Patel, very beautiful, she was just having his second child, and her mother, Sir Khan's stepmother, was highly respected in the neighbourhood for interfaith work. So if there's any trouble with faith-based problems in the neighbourhood, police would come to her and seek advice. So they weren't just an ordinary family. The Khan's family was highly respected in that Beeson and Dewsbury area. So they didn't pick just anybody, okay? And parents would trust Khan with their daughter to take them to school, for example. He had a car who would pick up people's daughters to take them to school in the morning. So he was trusted and admired by the neighbourhood, and also he had a group that would help to get kids off heroin. There's quite heroin epidemics in the area, and they would sort of dry them out cold turkey, and also take them to outdoor activities like they did whitewater rafting. There's pictures of them having a whale of a time whitewater rafting. Khan took out to Wales or somewhere to have a good weekend, and that would help them to get them off drugs. So you wouldn't have thought someone like that could be recast as a terrorist, okay? But they could, they did, and it's a process of character assassination to extinguish the real being and real life achievements of the person and try to project onto him the image of a terrorist through which is developing really I would suggest of fictional narratives. Okay, let me conclude with looking at the wider perspective. Why the hell, supposing you ask me, well, why the hell would the government want to do a thing like this? Okay, I'm saying that there is complicity in the government, Tony Blair, MI5, National Police, BBC, but I'm not saying that they initiated the whole thing. They were told by the empire, or whoever you think is running this world, look, the Al-Qaeda terror threat has to be experienced by the British people. Last year it was Spain. You've got to get them to take seriously the meaning of terror. And both Tony Blair says, look, forget it, mate, I don't want to do that. Then the offer came through, look, Paris thinks it's got the Olympic Games, it's halfway built the Olympic Stadium, the coming Olympic Games, but you can have it if you take this deal. That was it. I don't know if you remember those heady times, there was a sudden switch, suddenly, a day or so before 7/7, there was dancing in the streets because it was announced that we'd got the Olympic Games. Can anyone remember that? It's a time of terrific euphoria. Also, so if you can remember, the terrific free music concerts that were going on around the world, what are they called?
Live 8.
Live 8. Live 8 with Bob Geldof and all that. They were putting pressure. There's a big G8 summit going on in Scotland, okay? Remember all the leaders going in Scotland? G8 summit. And Live Aid was putting terrific pressure on the G8 leaders to forgive the debt of Africa. Now we're talking about really big money here. The big multinationals, gold and diamonds, getting loot out of Africa and leaving Africa with debt. And G8 they were being pressured to forgive the debt of Africa. Okay. So what happens? Bush and Blair shake hands at G8. Then what happens? A day later, the bombs go off. Now, I don't expect that you remember, but a couple of years before, something similar happened. Bush and Blair meet in London, or Blair comes to England. So Bush comes to England, and a bomb goes off in Istanbul. Now, let me just fill that out a bit. Bush is so much hated because of the war in Iraq that he cannot appear anywhere in public. Okay, there's a danger that his whole visit to England is going to look like a complete catastrophe. I was told when he earlier went to Australia, there he was waving at totally non-existent crowds. That's what he was photographed waving. Okay, but here he was, as it were, trapped in Buckingham Palace. He was in Buckingham Palace. He couldn't go out because he's so much hated anywhere he turned up. Okay, so we naively thought, well, hang on, this is going to be some sort of victory. The peace movement, anti-war demonstrators are going to win this. The headlines are going to be that we've somehow won and Bush cannot appear at all. But that wasn't going to happen, no. The empire can't fall apart that easily. Now, the next day, the bomb goes off in Istanbul, British embassy blown up, and Blair and Bush shake hands, they meet together and they're resolved to walk tall and stand firm against terrorism. Okay, so that was a couple of years ago. That's the previous time Bush and Blair meet in London. Bomb goes off. So you have going forward to 2005 again, July the 7th. They have just met up, basically the day before in Scotland, the G8 summit, and then the 7/7 event happens, and it terminates all the hopes of the world for forgiving the debt of Africa. It terminates any hope that things were going to change. Instead, you just get the rhetoric of the war on terror. Okay, so let me suggest that was a main geopolitical purpose of the event, that the big multinationals that control our world were not about to lose billions and billions from forgiving the debt of Africa or whatever. That didn't happen, and instead you get a ratifying of the war on terror. Okay, let me suggest for the literary minded amongst you that the words of Machiavelli have never been more true than they are today. He said, "I say that the ruler has cause to fear a standing army more than it has cause to fear any enemy, any foreign enemy." Well, we've got a big standing army. It's called NATO. It's permanently there, and what it does is ensure its own future by creating theatre. And the theatre it creates gives you an image of an enemy, a frightening enemy. As George Orwell so clearly warned us, that enemy is not actually real. If you remember in 1984, which in a way we all need to reread now in this awful new political reality, there's Winston, and there are bombs falling on the country, and Winston's girlfriend says to him, "Look, now we're not really at war with Eurasia, those bombs are just from our own government to make us think there's an enemy." And so that was Orwell's perception a long time ago. I'm afraid something like that is happening now, that we get complicity of our own government with the killing of our own citizens, and that's the reason why there can never be a public inquiry. Okay, that is the terrible reality of the world we're living in. And how do we get there? How do we get such a betrayal of all the things we thought we believed in? Well, to answer that, you might want to watch The Power of Nightmares, a BBC film by who's it by?
Adam Curtis.
Adam
Curtis.
Adam Curtis, a real classic trilogy, The Power of Nightmares, about the summoning up of the Al-Qaeda image, how politicians find that having a demonised enemy image out there is really handy for controlling us. Okay? Now that's been going on a long time, hasn't it? If you think medieval times, the priest would have control, and if you didn't believe what he told you to believe, you'd be damned. You were the spawn of Satan, you know, excommunicated and damned, and the hate image could be thrown against you to blast you. And is that so different from what's happening now? We used to have the communists to hate and fear, didn't we? Old focus here will remember how frightening the communist menace was. And if your thought was a bit too independent, you'd be accused of being red or pinko, and that meant you were disloyal to the main narrative. Okay? Well, communism faded away in 1991. Suddenly it was all gone. The evil empire wasn't there anymore. And so the military, the American military, had a very difficult decade because there wasn't an enemy. Oh, goodness gracious. How come the military can keep spending billions and billions of taxpayers' money if there isn't an enemy? You know? And also, what narrative, how could you explain the American bases all around the world if there wasn't communism anymore? You know? So the new enemy had to be brewed up. It was absolutely necessary for all those bases around the world. And that was 9/11 gave you that new vocabulary of terror and the enemy. And I suggest that the London bombing what was a kind of ratifying here in England of that vocabulary. Okay? Right. I think that's quite long enough. So, any questions? Any comments?
Well, I agree with a lot of what you said. I had suspicions about it because I read a book on 9/11, which sort of disproved a lot of the things about 9/11. And well, I mean, I just wonder, what is your opinion on this ISIS?
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Is that a new?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very important new development. In Syria, the American Marines were supposed to attack the Assad government, and they found there was a whole lot of Muslims who could loosely be called Al-Qaeda, likewise doing the same, because Muslims feel they don't like secular governments. Very unfortunate, and it's a terrible and dreadful thing that British Muslims do go out fight against the Assad government. I think they should be proud to have a secular government in Syria, but they're not. Anyway, there was a crisis that Marines, American Marines, said, well, look, hang on, we're fighting on the same side of Al-Qaeda. That doesn't make sense. And they started protesting. You know, we don't want to fight on the same side as Al-Qaeda, because they're supposed to be the enemy, right? And that was basically the end of Al-Qaeda. There had to be a new vocabulary then. And so they had to brew up this ISIS. ISIS stands for, what was it? Israeli Intelligence Secret Service, or something?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I think that's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a site, SITE, by somebody, Rita Katz, SIT, that puts out these beheading videos. And that's the same site, so Israeli Mossad site, and the same site that put out all the fake Bin Laden videos, about 20, after he died in 2001. They kept producing these fake Bin Laden videos, and they put out these beheading videos, which is, I would say, I'm absolutely gobsmacked that fabricated terror can be as cheap as this. You know, I mean, the London bombing was quite a big, complicated thing to arrange to get people to hate the right enemy, and I'm amazed that you can now do it so cheaply. You have two actors, one speaking American, the other speaking English, and there's a rubber knife, and you see one sort of trying to cut the throat of the other, and then one is lying down with some ketchup and fake blood. It's just a totally, I thought it was pretty obvious fake video situation, and I was absolutely amazed. There's about 4 of those beheading videos. Is that right?
About that, yes.
About
Quite
4,
a few, yeah.
I was watching the House of Commons debate, and all these sort of, through with smart cufflinks and ties and that upper crust English accent, and they're talking about why they have to start rebombing Iraq again, as well as Syria. You'd have thought, haven't they done enough damage to Iraq? And that narrative then of ISIS, whoever we're supposed to believe it is a justification for rebombing. And I suggest let's make an ethical imperative that I hope all civilised people in the world can share, that whatever the problem is, bombing other people is not the answer. But bombing other countries, especially other villages and whatever, farmers, whoever you think you're bombing, that is not the answer, whatever the problem is. I mean, how on earth did we get the idea that it's okay to bomb other nations? We should feel. I suggest that we should feel horror about the very idea of doing that, which our government is obviously about to restart. So I hope that slightly answers how Al-Qaeda terror threat morphed into ISIS.
What's your view of the prevent strategy?
Well, I think this is part of the Metropolitan Police. I'm not an expert on that, but it's the Metropolitan Police idea of anticipating terror, of weeding out terrorists in the population. I mean, a lot of people believe that there is hotbeds of Islamic terrorism all around the place in this country, and that it's exported abroad and so on. And I've tried talking to people, looking at statistics, talking to Muslims, and I may be wrong. I honestly don't think there is such a terror threat. I think there are angry Muslims because we keep bombing their nations, and there are idiotic, stupid Muslims who go out and want to fight against the Syrian government. But I don't think there is a great Islamic terror threat in this country. My impression is that the terror is cooked up to make us, to make it appear that way. Is there anyone, sorry, is there anyone else who can answer that question better than I can about the prevent strategy? Anyone? No. Would you like to comment?
Well, no, I went to a thing by chart, said where was it? At Oxford College from the Malcolm X, a group of sort of commemorate Malcolm X.
Right.
And there were quite a few mix of people, but there were some Arabic guys there, and they had all sorts of theories about which were were very debatable, you could say, but to do with what the prevent strategy, how it was being run similar. It sort of had an echo with what your argument to do with this coincidence of these drills going on in places where there were these bombs, and so they were kind of speculating along the lines that although it's ostensibly a strategy to stop radicalisation, it's also being used as a way to actually create the opposite. So they had a kind of conspiratorial view on that whole strategy. Mm-hmm. And there were link-ups via the internet to people in Pakistan and one in Palestine, live links, who were more the Malcolm X side of things. But in the discussion after, certainly there's 2 or 3 Arabic guys who had quite a conspiratorial view of that whole strategy in terms of, especially around the time of those 3 girls who went across, who were caught on video, going across to Syria, and the line was, why was that so heavily publicised, and as if it was like in some way a call to arms, or with the collusion of the authorities in some way. So I mean, I was just standing back at, because I'd stumbled.
Obviously, Cameron has now announced that non-violent extremists must be targeted, and Theresa May's announced there's going to be white paper and legislation, which I think is extremely sinister. Who are non-violent extremists? And it's clear that it will dissolve the boundary that has hitherto existed between honest law-abiding citizens and criminals. That the police are going to be able to arrest non-violent extremists because they're allegedly thinking something, or they might be intending to do something. I think that is a catastrophic step whereby you totally lose the definition of the word crime. It means that we as a culture no longer know what crime means, and the police can step in because they think you're intending to do something. So whatever legislation might be coming now, it seems to be very much directed at conspiracy theorists, people like me, trying to intimidate people and criminalise them, which might, for example, dissuade you lot from coming here and stuff. Yeah, okay.
Do you think this?
You were going to say something.
Oh yes, yeah, you were going to say.
I went to the same university that the what was it? John is supposed to went to, and I was there. I started there in 1994.
Yeah.
And I would say that there definitely has been a promotion of a certain radical Islam that's been going on for probably about 20 years. I mean, I was there 20 years ago.
Right.
And that's and I know that when I was there, we used to have a lot of there's the Muslim group would come into the canteen. They'd start calling everyone whores, prostitutes. They'd be sort of telling everybody that if you didn't follow the Islam, that that's what you were, you're a paedophile, whatever. That what I'm trying to say is I think that for 20 odd years or so in Britain.
And which college is this?
University of Westminster.
Oh right, yeah.
So I would say that for the past 20 odd years, I would say a lot of young people in the UK, young Muslims, have been exposed to a sort of a radicalised.
And what's the
this sort of negative version of Islamic teaching has been going on for quite a long time. I think that now, 20 years down the line, what you've got is like the kids of people maybe from those generations or whatever, they're growing up which is why you're seeing 15-year-old girls running into Syria or whatever.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that it's been going for a while. It's now the result of that is coming through.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know,
Right.
who's funding it, who's promoting it. I mean, they say Saudi Arabia possibly,
Yeah.
but you know, it's been going for quite a while. I just think that there is something.
Right.
I mean, I would say that maybe that kind of Islam has been deliberately created to
Yeah.
encourage this kind of reaction, and that's why now it's actually quite. It might. I don't know how entrenched it is, but I think a lot of people have grown up with that, and you're going to find a lot of people from 40 years old, 45 down, that actually do actually believe that kind of.
Yeah, and would you say that that radicalising involves any conditional homicidal tendency? I'll tell you why I ask you. Somebody was alleging that the Quran has got passages in it about killing the infidels, and I asked my friend Kevin Barrett, who's an Arab professor and stuff, and he said there's no passage in the Quran as there are in the Old Testament. The Old Testament's full of, you know, genocidal intent and wiping out this and must wipe out that and blow the Amalekites to bits. He said there are no homicidal or genocidal passages in the Quran as there are in the Old Testament. I don't know whether that's correct or not, but you know, that is the best informed source that I'm aware of. So let me ask you, in the stressful language that you got heard in the canteen of sort of Muslims denouncing the lax ethos of the West, did you feel there was any conditional intent that you know, anything homicidal
I think
might
at the time
take
we didn't have what we've got now. We haven't got what's going on around us. So you know, you just thought these are sort of like slightly nutty people and they just sound like crazy lunatics. But obviously now, looking back on it, I would say that this is you know, this is the start of the. Well, it was obviously probably going on before I went to university. But what I'm saying is that was probably the very early days of that kind of philosophy being, as well as a lot more working class people went to university from the 1990s because they opened up the university. Access became expanded. You know, more people went to university for the first time from families. So much more people would have gone to university, would have heard that.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't have heard it before because they would have just been.
Yeah, but Massa doesn't necessarily imply that. For example, Muslims often believe women in modest attire, women, for example. I'm being very shocked that Western women expose themselves, legs visible or whatever. Possibly that language could have meant that Muslims felt they wanted some more women to dress more modestly or something. I mean, it doesn't necessarily imply that you're going to intend to get a gun and shoot people, does it?
I wouldn't say it was just encouraging people to kill, but it was definitely
misogynistic.
Well, it's just sort of like encouraging the separation of people. I mean, my problem with religions.
Well, I find that is difficult about Muslims. They do separate themselves. Yeah.
But it was encouraging that kind of mindset, and I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying that to me was the start of what we're seeing happening now with people wanting to run to murder and mayhem.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a very powerful mind control program that's happening with people that you'd actually want to go somewhere dangerous, or you're told it's dangerous. That's you're going against human survival instinct, wanting to run somewhere where you know where you're being told. So there's some very powerful mind control thing happening in my view, and the media that we've got now, the internet and stuff, can make it easier.
Yes. Would anyone else like to comment?
My niece, who's in her 50s, she's been insulted by Muslims that are standing around in groups, you know, calling her a slut and all sorts of things. You know, she said, you know, if she's walking along and she goes past a group of them, they will, you know, they're quite insulting. And she dresses very conservative.
Report to the police, you know.
Pardon?
Report them to the police. That's done for it.
What will the police do? The thing is, they're very lax on these people because they don't want to upset them, do they?
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think.
And also, if you think about, say for example, let me think. Well, one of the Muslim countries, there's a lot of Christians being murdered at the minute, including priests, and they're innocent. So why are they picking Why are they picking on innocent people? When the priests haven't done any violence to them, and Christians, why are they murdering Christians? When we're so accommodating to Muslims, going out of our way to be open-minded and considerate, and all live alongside each other? Why can't they have that narrative as well? Why,
might be Syria you're talking about. Might be Syria.
No, not just Syria. I'm talking about Iraq. There's a lot of Christians being murdered in Iraq. A lot of priests. A lot of so they're actually not allowed to be. You're not allowed to be a Christian in parts of Iraq and probably in Syria as well, and in many. You know, I don't know. I know Iraq for definite because of Blackfriars. There's quite a few people being murdered. You know, one of the Dominican colleges at the University of Oxford is Blackfriars, and you know, some of them have seen some horrific things happening to Christians. So why don't they just target? If Muslims, this narrative is so innocent that you're saying, and it's all a conspiracy theory. Well, why are these innocent people murdering Christians in their own country when there's absolutely no need to do that? And why don't they let them live peacefully alongside them like we do?
I think there might be something in that kind of that supposed radical Islam being promoted. Who's promoting it? Who's paying for that kind of? Who's paying for those sort of imams and that sort of training? I would say that maybe there could be something more behind that, which is why you're seeing it. So, do you see what I mean? So that's for example, like, you know, quite a lot of these radical preachers come from Saudi Arabia. No one ever criticises Saudi Arabia. No one ever mentions Saudi Arabia as a threat to anybody there. They're our friends, they're a just country, they can live on Yemen, no one criticises that. And what I'm saying is that quite a lot of these preachers have come from there, or been trained from there, and there's a lot of money there, you know. You can go to Boko Haram, who's training that, who's paying for all those weapons? Someone's paying, no one asks who's behind the training and of the preachers or the people that's in the group. So, and my one of my personal things before I go is, if I was, you know, I find it very funny that if you're living in Israel as a Jew, you're not concerned about ISIS when you're surrounded, you know, supposedly surrounded by the beheading manic Muslims, but yet you're worried about Hamas mostly, who's a secular organisation, or more secular than ISIS. They're not radical Muslim from what I understand, but there's no concern. I don't see any concern about that, which I find it bizarre because we're more frightened of ISIS here than they seem to be in Israel. Why would you not?
I wonder if that's because they're in a war situation, whether they. And obviously the Middle East.
But I'd be more worried about ISIS taking over the Palestinian people coming in.
Doesn't Hamas deny the state of Israel? Is that?
But I'd be more worried about that. That's next door, Syria.
Can we just?
Can have a two-state.
Can we just move on, Benson?
Yeah, I mean, what this lady here said has made a good point. No, of course, not all these radical Muslims who whatever they're doing are Mossad agents. They're not all with the CIA. They can't be. Some of them are. They really believe it, and they are real, and they're doing it because they've been indoctrinated with extremist religious belief. But as you said, you talked about Boko Haram and where's the money coming from, who's training them. We know that the Western intelligence agencies did indeed fund and train radical Muslims in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. We also know that. Well, there's several particular individuals who I think are very suspicious. When you're talking about domestic politics, for example, there's a very noisy chap called Anjem Chowdhury, he seems to do very little, and his group of people around him, they don't do an awful lot. But when the TV cameras appear, suddenly they appear. They appear in their shirt tails and their beards, and they do something really distasteful. They picket at a soldier's funeral, they burn remembrance poppies. This group goes by various names. It's known as Al-Muhajirun, it's had several other names. But I found out from somebody, I'll have to get the details, that Chowdhury himself was involved with MI6 during the Bosnian War. He was actually trained here in Oxford as a lawyer. He was a member of the Oxford Union. Now, the intelligence agencies do recruit from students in the Oxbridge colleges. No doubt about it. You know about the Cambridge spies. Oxford's exactly the same as Cambridge. The question is, if that is true, the fact that he was working for the British intelligence agencies in the Bosnian War and then suddenly becomes this radical Muslim cleric doesn't fit. How did he go from one to the other?
What do you mean? Was he was he Christian or was he?
He's always been a Muslim,
secular?
I think.
Oh, he's always
From
been
what I
Muslim.
gather.
And what did you say? How did he go from the intelligence services as a Muslim to a radical Muslim?
Well, the question is, he went from serving the state within the intelligence organisations to suddenly this guy who appears in what looks like a costume to me on television. Even some of his opponents say, look, he doesn't really mean what he's saying. There's a guy called Majid Nawaz who's always debating with him.
In Bosnia, he's been seen a lot because, today's the anniversary of my daughter's family who were murdered by a soldier who was in Bosnia.
Is that Srebrenica, the massacre?
Well, he was in Bosnia serving as a British soldier. And he came home and killed 4 members of my daughter's family, including a father, a grandparent and uncle. So what's not to say? So he went mental basically serving in Bosnia because family was killing family. So what's not to say that that man in the intelligence service couldn't have gone mental and become a radical extremist?
I don't have the details. It's, I don't have the details now.
People.
Possibly, yeah. But
especially living in a homicidal place like when Bosnia families were killing families, or Northern Ireland, or the first Gulf War.
He's the thing. The other thing is he's just the most recent of a series of, dare I say, characters that have appeared in the media, who seem to almost run. They almost seem to run from one to another concurrently. For instance, before him it was Omar Bakri, before him was Abu Hamza, and it just...
He's become a radical Muslim, but he's been in Bosnia, he's seen a lot of injustice, a lot of hatred, a lot of violence. I can't remember... Especially he's working for the intelligence.
I don't have the details now, but...
Yeah.
Should we wrap up the discussion? Is that all right?
If you've had enough, yeah?
Yeah, I think I had a really good discussion, exchange of views. And I hope you appreciate it. I feel on 10th anniversary we have done something, haven't we? And you're representing the people of Oxford somehow. This glorious city. Yeah, if anyone wants a book, it's on sale. Reduced price, only a tenner, amazing reduction. And should we go on to the pub afterwards? Or?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
What was that one up the road we went to?
Jericho Tavern. Yeah, it's a nice one.
Yes, anyone wants to join us. Yes.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. Thank you. And just to remind you, the book is here, 10. 2 for 30.
10 years since this disaster took place. When you ask most people, they will regurgitate the same line that they heard when the official story was delivered. Some other people like Nick Kollerstrom have had the guts and they've had the intelligence to see through the official lies and speak out. They've been vilified in the media. Special TV programmes have been made specifically to demonise us and to make us appear stupid and heartless and not caring about the victims and all that nonsense. I myself was asked to take part in more than one of these documentaries. I declined. We need to start looking at this information. We need to start looking at not just this one event, the London bombings, but how it fits into the general context of what Nick Kollerstrom calls the great artwork of the 21st century, false flag terrorism. Because London bombings is just one of many, many state-orchestrated terror events which have been blamed on somebody else. And I don't think it's respectful to the families of those who died and their memory. And I don't think it's sensitive to the loved ones of those people who died to maintain the lie about what killed them. I think the only way you can show respect, it's like my poem where I did that. I made a video called "Show Some Respect," which is based on a poem I wrote. Have a watch of that. Because if we don't, how long is it going to be before the next terrorist attack? How long is it going to be before the next false flag? It may not be one man. It was with Lee Rigby. Just one man was killed. Next time it could be 100. It could be 1,000. It could be 10,000 or more. It's a trick that the government use on us. False flag terrorism. It's provable. It's real. 9/11, 7/7, Lee Rigby, these are all false flag terrorist attacks. The government keeps doing it to us because it keeps working. And if a trick keeps working, why not keep using it? They'll stop using it when it stops working. Simple as that. So it's time to wake up and get real, quite frankly. Many thanks to my good friend Nick Kollerstrom for that brilliant lecture. Thanks to everyone who attended and asking such brilliant questions. And thanks to Dennis at the shop, the Albion Beatnik bookshop. I do recommend that shop if ever you're in Oxford. And thanks to you, Panmo TV viewers, for watching. Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order.